Aaron, can you hear me?
Yep, all good. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Cool. Yeah, nice.
Okay, so I just put in our little private little channel there, the two possible topics, one of which I think is actually deferrable, but the more immediate one I think was the onboarding one. But shall we do a check-in as Tammy suggests?
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I can check in. It's kind of getting late here. I will be having to go get dinner in like an hour, but life is good. Like a really good quality of life where I am eating lots of good food, vegetables, fruits. Life's good.
So
How
this
about you?
is Spain. What
Yeah,
town in Spain?
southern Spain. I'm in Malaga, basically. Uh, if you know Malaga area, Andalusia.
I don't.
It's like
Oh, okay.
it's like very like authentic, like kind of the how Spain is stereotyped is as Andalusia. So it's like very Spanish. It's where the flamenco comes from here, and it's kind of like the caricature that you see of Spanish people. They actually look like that. And maybe it's kind of the Texas. Some people call it the Texas of Spain. Kind of like Americans are cowboy. It's very similar and
I've
perfect
only been in
climate.
Spain once, so I did not make my way to Malaga. But
Was it
just
Barcelona
as
or Madrid?
I flew into Madrid, and we then, where did I go? I went to Valencia, Barcelona. Those are the three main. Oh, and Palma out on Mallorca.
Hmm.
Those are the
Cool.
places I went. Yeah,
Did you enjoy it?
very much. That was actually in the good times of my marriage. That was the honeymoon of my marriage.
Nice, nice. That's good.
Yeah,
That's good. Cool.
yeah. I'm just sorry. Go ahead. I
Oh, just
I
cool.
interrupted you.
No, no, that's all I got pretty much. Yeah. And nice chatting with you earlier today and kind of connecting.
Yeah, I
Hopefully.
wrote a note saying it was good to see you on these calls again, and I think you might have seen. I actually went and reserved two domains for us:
Oh, I saw one.
globalchallengescollaboration.org and .com. I made them both for
Cool.
a year just in case we don't like them, but
Yeah.
if we like them, we can extend.
Great.
So anyway, I think that conversation we can actually defer. It's late for you. You need to get dinner. I actually haven't gotten any work done yet. Towards my paid gig today,
Yeah.
and I've been up since 5:30, and it's now 11 o'clock my time. So it's 5.5 hours that I've been doing this other stuff, which is actually more fun.
Yeah.
But pay
Yeah.
the bills sooner or later.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, how does it feel to keep it to 30 minutes or less? Because I do want to make sure that we talk about onboarding because I think there's some things that you and I can do together. Um,
Yep.
but the website stuff, I agree with what you said during the meeting, and that was essentially what I was thinking as well. So I think we can do that some other time when we're both more available. I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's great. In terms of building that website or
Yeah, I mean, just talking about it, because right now I
strategizing
think,
it.
yeah, this is onboarding piece, which of course will end up involving the website,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
naturally. But the way I'm thinking about this is there's going to be a number of roles that people play,
Mhm.
and just think about myself, for example. I got an invitation out of the blue, it felt like, from Tammy. So until then, I was just, random, person X somewhere in the universe. And at some point, one of the GCC members, in my case, it was Tammy, reached out and invited me and said, hey, we're doing this. Find out about it. Decide if you want to join, right? You designed this process, so you know exactly what happened, right? So then I read it. I said, I have some questions. I tried to read, like 3 months worth of history, which was like 90 pages of chat transcript, et cetera, et cetera. But eventually, I jumped in, and so there's going from raw recruit to initiate to someone who's committed to stage 1 to someone who's committed to stage 2 to someone who's actually authoring the proposal. So there's a number of stakeholder types, as far as I can tell, and maybe too many, But anyway, each of them has, what's the information content we want to give them? What's the experience with GCC we want to design for them? What is the commitment we're asking from them? Why is it that we want to, ask them to go from one stakeholder type to another stakeholder type? To me, I'm asking all those questions and also experiencing that at the same time. And a number of the people that have come on recently, like Belinda, like Anna, like Neil, like others, they all had a version of that, right? They all said, okay, so what does it mean to go from stage 1 to stage 2? And what do I have access to? And are we using Slack, or are we using Dropbox, or are we using Google Docs, or are we using this, or are we using that? So some of it can be a bit bewildering, and I might make the crass accusation that I landed in this group with a bunch of left-brainers because I'm much more visually oriented. I'd prefer to see things in diagrams. So until I have those pictures and flows, I don't really understand what's really going on. Yeah. And Neil's actually come up with a number of diagrams. It looks like text is, and I've got some diagrams of my own. So perhaps melding the two together might be a good way to make things more comprehensible. So I'm just also trying to say, if with all of that, how can we simplify this experience? Right now, somebody's got to come in and jump in and read a 27-page proposal to really get what's going on. Is there some way we can actually structure it into a paragraph or two, like what Tammy wants to put on this petition site, or what might actually go in the front of this proposal content that says, this is basically what we're about. This defines us. Is this you? Yeah. Okay, keep it to that, and not many questions. In fact, I like the work you're doing with Represent.me, but to me, that even felt like too many questions, And petitions that I've been a part of are, this is what we believe in. Are you in? Yes, no, name, zip code, email address, boom, you're done. Right? Yeah. Now, maybe one or two other questions might be fine, but some of them are a bit harder to understand, like, small world networks, I got to go find out what that is. Or, I understand Dunbar's number now, yes, but, somebody else would have to find out what that is, So there's a number of obstacles in that someone would have to hurdle through, or maybe they're filters intentionally designed to filter those people out. They operate both ways,
It's interesting.
So what that could do is, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Well, no, you go ahead. I'll just remember this thought that I had.
Okay. So anyway, I was just thinking that I'm always thinking of how do I simplify the experience for a particular stakeholder type.
Yep.
So in other words, if I'm initiating, what do I need to do? Hopefully it's short. What decisions do I need to make? Hopefully it's simple and clear. And then, apply that in both cases, okay? So that people can move through this and say yes, no, with clarity and understand the commitment they're making. Because I have to admit, I think that there was a lot of words and a lot of complexity that made me essentially jump on board mostly on trust rather than the actual content of the actual materials. So that's my end of my introduction.
That's great. Cool. So I can shoot some ideas. Yeah, just kind of what you're saying. So this process, historically, I think our documentation's okay. And it's a smart thing to do to go through and look at the earliest chats. So you probably see it began with William and Daniel, and then they contacted me. And so the process was kind of Daniel's invention, not to shirk my guilt, or, not say I'm not good. So so I agree with you. I do think it could have been designed a bit better. I think there are ways to design it better. There's also something interesting, just kind of like a pattern that I'll throw out, which is that it's totally a natural tendency for people to kind of fit their description of the project toward their own narrative, right? And not to say that people are bad or something like, it's just like,
It's
so,
natural.
right? So
Don't you
like
say it's natural?
Daniel was like the first, and he was very much just like, he couldn't get out of building it toward APIs, because that's what he's doing right now for the next, as a contract for
Got it.
enough. And then the represent.me thing, right? I came to it kind of thinking, okay, I'm just going to make this a very simple metric to show who signed up. But then Ed kind of pulls me in and he says, no, you should make it about surveying your people and having good, data on and so, because he pulls me into his represent.me. And I think that, I can see flavors of where Tammy's approaching it. And actually, I do kind of really like how I see you thinking, because I don't really ever see, oh, that's just Sam bringing his own view of reality into it. I think that you're actually pretty good at this, about not really not contaminate, that's a negative word, but I'm going to use it. but yeah, you don't really, I think you're good at that. And maybe that's because you're kind of thinking about collaborology a lot, which is how to not do that, right? Does that mix? I mean, that's essentially how to not do that, how to not just go and throw your own thing in, and then you just have a collection of everybody's things.
So I appreciate your observation on that. I think it is true to some extent. I mean, I call myself, here's how I introduce myself. I'm a founding but amateur collaborologist. Okay, so there's no black belt in collaborology right now. Everybody's kind of a white belt right now. I'm trying to pass from white belt to orange belt, for example. So yes, because had I wanted to, I could have come in and thrown, 10 different terms at you: global sim, WYSI do, tweet, learn, mentor, blah, blah, blah. And I could have done all of this stuff that has all this terminology. And I could say, yeah, I've spent 12 years thinking about this, blah, blah, blah. But I haven't, to my knowledge, done that in a heavy-handed manner. I've done that lightly in places where I've saw things fit and where I saw some receptivity. But like I mentioned, at times there's about 6 to 10 things that I could be bringing and say, Aaron, you got to read this, and then you got to read this other thing, and then you got to read that, and then it all connects this way, and then blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And I could overpower a lot of people, not overpower, but I could overwhelm a lot of people with just the time demand before they actually even try to get what I'm trying to talk about.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm trying not to do that.
Yep, totally. And listening more than speaking kind of thing, right? Trying to listen more than speak.
Stroking my beard, I like to stroke my beard.
Yeah, it's important. So then, so yeah, that's kind of like the high level. We're trying to figure out how to work through this. I think that we just kind of want to hope that everyone has goodwill. And so far, my sense I do believe that everyone has goodwill, right?
Oh, no question.
Pretty sure. I have pretty good, you can never really, know. It takes a lot of time usually too.
You never know
so far,
until the conflict, that happens, right?
Yeah, so you try to have some conflict emerge then too. That helps things. So yeah, that's what we're trying to work through right now. And so then there's this proposal. It's really long. And in a lot of ways, it's not exactly what I would write. But I think that it's good. And I think that this is the challenge itself. I wrote one Facebook post. Facebook is a management platform. I'm very much of the spirit of we just have to keep on slightly improving and progressing. Like right now, we managed to get out of the Facebook chat because that was really hell. Nothing was, we couldn't scale beyond 4 people on a Facebook chat. And okay, now we're up to a Facebook group. We'll see where that kind of maxes out, maybe with 50 people or something. But anyway, coming back, diverging, if this thing if the proposal that we come up with seems like a little bit of a melting pot, then it's kind of an artifact of how hard this problem is, which, is that a little glib because I'm saying, oh yeah, that's the trick, that it's, it's not that good because it's a melting pot. Well, the people that are going to judge a proposal, they might just say, we don't really care, it's not that good. But anyway, I do think that that's kind of the difficult thing that we're trying to work through right now. So anyway, I guess that's just kind of my thoughts on this. That's kind of how I see this, as just kind of a hard experiment, a really hard
So if I'm
experiment.
going to take what you're thinking and maybe just, shine a light through a different angle through your brain,
Yeah.
how would that impact on this topic that you and I are supposed to be talking about, which is the onboarding topic?
Yes. Yeah. And so onboarding, and so we're not having to kind of get tied down to, we have a domain, so we're not having to tie down to using some kind of platform or anything like that, right? That's kind of how you're framing it right
There's
now?
no platform that's been assumed. All we have right now is a domain or two domains that we can choose to use or not. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then how do we onboard from there? Okay, well, I mean, there's a lot to talk about. We're trying to do 30 minutes. Maybe I should just kind of give kind of like a high level, kind of how I like systems to be designed kind of thing.
Then you and I could go for a couple hours on that, but yes, let's see. Try and keep that to 12 minutes.
Yeah. So how should we design this? So yeah, okay. I'll try to do a quick little dump. I am a massive fan of Bitcoin and the community that they've built. And I think that in a way we're talking about how do open source projects work here. And I'm not an expert on open source projects. I have friends who are deeper involved in open source projects than I am. I have a good friend who's really deep into Haskell, for instance. But it's really, really hard, right? I've been doing this, I've been playing around in this space now for like 2 years. How do you create a distributed open source project, distributed teams? It's really hard. I think that Bitcoin has kind of nailed it because they built an economy, right? It's an open source project with its own economy. How cool is that, right? And I mean, look at how they're growing. Look, they're totally hockey sticking. And I don't think they're going to be taken down anytime soon. I don't think that anything that could happen is something more powerful could emerge. Maybe it's going to be Ethereum, for instance. But so how do we build in that kind of, and I really believe that things need to be financially sound. I do believe I'm a big fan of money, fiat currency. And so coming back, I think that any open source project does have to really be creating value for people. And it has to be coming in waves to keep on re-engaging people as Bitcoin. I think that's part of why Bitcoin's been so successful, because this variable rewards game, variable rewards and how you can kind of like mind. It's very much what storytelling is. I'm sure you know the concepts of storytelling. Variable rewards is like the specific, they're trying to model exactly how people get engaged, right? And so variable rewards is like, if I press on a button, then a piece of chocolate drops out. But if I press on it again, nothing comes out. I press on it again, and then a pencil comes out. If it's something different every time, people keep on pressing on the button. But if I press on a button and every time a piece of chocolate comes out, I'm only going to press it when I need chocolate, right? So, and people are modeling that. That's how a lot of products are being designed at Facebook, actually, which is kind of dark. It's kind of playing with people's minds, right? A lot of these products are now designed to play with people's minds. Anyway, it's also very similar to storytelling too, right? Like, oh, okay, Act 1, the context is set and he's going on an adventure. Act 2, oh, there's something bad happens. Oh, but Act 3, then he meets, so it is very much this kind of up and down thing. I do think that Bitcoin has kind of achieved that as an open source community, because it has been this like grand story of how we have Satoshi Nakamoto. Who is this guy? And we've survived 4 China bans, and we've all been there. We've seen it go and crash and go and crash. So, and they've been making real money along the way too. Like there's real treasure. So I think that a large part of their success as an open source movement is that people have really been just getting rocked. Like they're really part of this story, and it has all of the makings of being an addictive product or an addictive reality to really keep people engaged and keep on activate. It's like really awesome. They have amazing retention, basically. So, okay, onboarding, right? Okay, so yeah, back to onboarding. I think that for something to really work, then you are going to really kind of, you want to make them feel like they're now a part of a story. And I'm not an expert on UX and storytelling and product design, but I do know a good amount about it. I do dabble in it. I'm kind of a generalist. So I do think that we want to make them feel like, we could try to raise some money and give everybody a little bit of money. This is one idea that I had in the beginning. Too bad we didn't record those conversations. This money, then everyone should get a little bit of basic income to just work on this. But Daniel at the time had a lot more energy in this project. And that's oftentimes how these open source projects work. You kind of defer to the person that has more energy. So, and he was saying more so, no, I'd rather just be managing the whole fund and then be helping people build APIs for all of their different. And so I said, okay, that's cool. But now we're kind of evolving, right? Now things are kind of changing. Daniel's busy right now. So now here we are saying, well, what do we want to make this, right? And that's the nature of open source projects too. They can always evolve. So, so for instance, my original idea was I was saying, guys, why don't we get the group of 1,000 people and give each person a little bit of basic income, and then have people kind of make it an experiment around figuring out how we can collaborate with each other. And then you're just given a little bit of money as almost something symbolic, like $500 a month, not enough to live off of, but something symbolic now that we all have something that we could pool together that could be potentially valuable, which is kind of cool, because then you kind of get this dynamic of, maybe it's a co-budget, because then that kind of creates a context amongst it, or a way that we could leverage each other. And so this is kind of how I was thinking, because then we're part of this story together. And and that's coming back to Bitcoin. That's where Bitcoin's brilliant, because you have to stay within the rules of Bitcoin. Like, and they can try to evolve the code base, and they can, but you have to get consensus from many different people. But then it's also something really valuable, where if they can develop consensus around it, then, currently Bitcoin's market cap is 70 billion. So that was kind of how I was thinking. How do we kind of become part of a story collectively, which has, just kind of like trying to build in potential for us to be powerful together in some kind of way, whether it's sharing a co-budget of $1 million, that's kind of interesting, right? And these things are usually just a total disaster, right? Groups of people are an absolute disaster usually. So, but can we try to work through that, right? If the carrot is big enough, if it's $1 million, but we have to come to consensus on it, and it's 1,000 of us, how the heck, that's what Bitcoin's facing. Core developers of Bitcoin is something like 1,000 people, something like that. And they're playing with they now have a $70 billion co-budget. And so they are figuring out how to move things forward, because the stakes are so fucking high, right? So anyway, that's kind of how I've been thinking about it. And, so maybe I hope I'm not going too expansive, but onboarding is actually the first part of becoming a part of that story. So that's why I'm kind of trying to give just like my whole kind of how I could see this potentially working. And it's, everybody has to feel like they play an important role, but then they could also become part of something that's bigger than themselves. And I also kind of have them taking a stance of money does matter here. And I think that's why I like that we're applying to get money through we're applying for grant money. And that's why I think Bitcoin and a lot of these cryptocurrency communities have just been rocking it. They've just been awesome in terms of other open source projects are really brutal, where you have this tension between academia that's funding their professors to work in it, versus what Microsoft or Amazon want to be developed by the open source community. I'm sure you know about some of those tensions that are occurring in open source communities. So anyway, that's kind of so. And then, but okay, onboarding is part one of that whole kind of story, right? Onboarding is act one, if that's.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess kind of now at a small level, what do we do? We have 37 people. How do we activate them? How do we make them a part of that story? Or that's kind of how I would think about it. What do you think? And also, I don't have that much time. I'm kind of like this like guy who occasionally chips in 5 hours when I don't want to be working on normal things, and I'm like, whatever, I'll take 5 hours, I'll take half a day off and like help here.
Yep.
And that's probably where I'm going to continue to be, as just like occasionally hopping. Hopefully I helped a bit today. Sometimes it does help to have another voice. Hopefully I helped today in the conversation, just give another opinion and thought. Hopefully that does help a little. Anyway, please go on. What do you think about all
I think
my
that there needs to be that grand vision, right? Unless there's a grand vision, people don't know why they're joining something. One of the very first things I learned when I started working was those that know how usually end up working for those who know why. And I found that applicable time and time again. Okay. And so, Jobs is not the technical guy, it was Wozniak. But Jobs was the one that was driving direction, describing the vision, getting people, blood pumping, selling the product. Same thing with a number of other pairs or teams. So unless there is that compelling vision, they're shaking their heads saying, so what? So I do think that a lot of discussion around what this compelling vision could be is merited. This particular version that you just recounted, I haven't heard before, right? That was not one that had been part of the culture of GCC for new recruits. And we each read the text and we each come up with, that maps to something that I really wanted to do. And then that becomes the driving vision. And everybody's got their own version in their own heads about what this possibly could be. And until we do a good job figuring out what common elements of that we all more or less believe in, and then state that and say that's our identity, potentially we're all heading for multiple individual disappointments unless we get that clearly laid out. I think that's not to be underestimated as a potential risk. That's always a potential risk to a team. So it was in part that made me sort of share my little blog entry called the 8 Artifacts of How to Start a Team. One of them is, why do you exist? What is the charter? And yes, that's embedded in the introductory materials, but I think, it needs to be like short and crisp. And maybe that's a short, crisp thing that Tammy wants to put on a petition.org site, or, something that we want to put at the front of the eventual website. So I think that is something that will take some time to evolve. I think it's even more important than the actual proposal content, because that's the identity of this group or this community that we're trying to build. And if we actually let everybody define it themselves, then it's not really one community. It's basically a loose association of a bunch of autonomous entities, which is fine too. I like that model also. But I've seen it happen in too many groups that some people feel we're creating one identity and others are just supporting who's ever there just simply based on personal relationships. You see that with Bettina and Tammy already, which is completely valid. As long as there's no requirement that there be a single identity, those individual supporting relationships are perfectly okay. And to me, it's natural to have individual supporting relationships, and maybe over time, a number of them coalesce, and then some identity emerges. But until we recognize that both scenarios are possible, anybody with a single identity expectation is going to be disappointed if we don't have that clearly explicated. Now, it could be that you and Daniel and Tammy believe that that's clear and explicated already. But I think the questions that we've heard Bettina and I and Anna and Neil and to some extent Tex ask say that we could do a better job, I think, of making that clear. And maybe it's a natural that we just say every, whatever it is, month, 2 months, 6 months, whatever, we can revisit that identity and say, is that still us? Because we're going to be gathering a lot of new people. So two things, that identity plus the experience design for people as they transition from who the heck is GCC all the way to, wow, I'm a really committed, energetic core member of GCC that's really pushing, what this is trying to do, not just in the Challenges Foundation proposal, but, elsewhere. And, a number of, let's say the Buckminster Fuller grant, or let's say the other innovation foundations that are out there. Maybe it's a Gates Foundation, maybe it's the Knight Ridder Foundation, blah, 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 right? So once we have an identity, we can take that a number of different ways. Our identity, I submit, is not around the Global Challenges Foundation from this one millionaire in Sweden.
Yeah,
that's not why I'm here. I'm here because we can create a community that, yes, can respond to that one, but can also respond to the Knight Foundation, can also respond to the Buckminster Fuller Foundation, can also respond to, maybe even Stanford, maybe Gates,
So I remember two of the things that you've said that I've really enjoyed, and I think that might be what we're doing here, is one thing you've said is that it takes 30,000 people to change the world, something like that.
I said between 3 and 30,000, 3,000 and 30,000.
3 and 30. So I think we're kind of shooting for that, right? But how do you do that, right? I mean, because it's absolute madness if what I would love as a concrete outcome is if we could be a group of 1,000, 10,000 people, and somebody could come and drop $20 million on us to solve a problem, and we could solve it in a distributed way, kind of the hive, the intelligent hive. I think that's kind of what you're saying there too by that, right?
Yeah.
I think that would be really cool. And then also this idea of the 8th continent too, right? This is very much the internet that we're playing with right now. Even Facebook.
Tammy hasn't heard that. That's why that was disconcerting for her. It was out of context, I think, for her.
Yeah, that was cool. It's a trending term. I did look it up. It's people are starting to talk about it like that. And it's even happening too, right? Like, I've been seeing that just in the last, right, so 2012, Web 2.0 is truly only been in its prime for the last 5 years. And I think I pay attention closely to how its design is changing, right? Facebook used to just be for having your closed little community, but they've totally opened it up now, where they're starting to, recommendation engines for different people you should be talking with. So I think this is very much what we're experimenting with, how to create internet communities that can actually get shit done. Yeah, I think I like that vision. I think you're kind of on that. Am I perceived as kind of being one of the people that's at the core of this? Because I do.
Well, you're certainly there at the very earliest, right? You're there early. Yeah. So it's always a question, where's William? Where's Aaron? Where's Daniel?
It's interesting that this often happens to me. This has happened to me many times and I'm not saying that Daniel and Tammy have done this, but for some reason, maybe my name is in circulation or something, but I've had it. I don't know if you've seen that trick of where you just put someone's name on an advisory board. I've had that happen to me.
Always, right?
I don't know I don't know if my name, but I was contacted by them, by William and Daniel. And I said, oh yeah, this is kind of cool. I'm happy to be part of this conversation. Why don't you make a Facebook group? That was, and spent several hours talking with them. So, so am I at the core of it? I guess I was an early guy, a part of the conversation who made a Facebook group. Right. So, and it's interesting because I've had, multiple times people think that I'm the core of something. But I was just kind of an early guy just saying oh yeah, we could kind of go in that direction or something like that. So I hope that I'm not seen as just kind of dropping the ball or something like that, or just vanishing.
No, you were very clear about the kind of role you wanted to play, but I think it's a sign of the respect of the people that we actually are recruiting, that they want to basically make sure they're not disrespecting those who've been there before them.
Ah,
Right? So all
interesting.
the names that are there before them, it's like, okay, so I want to make sure that, we don't do something that crosses one of the early guys, whether it's Tammy, whether it's Daniel, whether it's William, whether it's, Aaron, whether it's me, some people might consider me one of the early guys now joining, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's the nature of the people that we're bringing in that they want to be that respectful of people that have been here before them.
So if I would say, this is cool. Maybe if we could kind of like, I'll say this. I think that, so this problem of how to create a group of 3 to 30,000 people that can help solve large
3,000 to
problems.
30,000. That's
3,000
what my number is.
Yeah.
There's an explanation for that, by the way, so we can go through that sometime.
Yeah, cool. I'd love to. I'm into that stuff, or the eighth continent, or what. I think that the way to approach it is, I sometimes I see all kinds of people in this space. There are some people that are very promiscuous, and I've had this. This has kind of happened to me where I thought I was collaborating with someone, but then I found out that they were getting around into a lot of different projects and doing a lot of things. And I was, uh-oh, I just looked at this guy's landing page and he's part of 30 different projects like this. Uh-oh. And I hope to not be appearing as that guy in this case. Or I hope that I'm clearly, I was just kind of, but anyway, what I'm kind of seeing is probably, I think that it's going to take a group of 3 to 5 people at the core that are going to have to come up with an idea. So we could play around with the time horizon, but I think that if we could create kind of a meta movement, right? So if we could create a meta movement where we just decide what the parameters are, I think that we would want to have kind of a hackathon around this for creating this group of 30,000, 3 to 30,000, or creating an eighth continent, and just have different core groups of 3 to 5 people, time box them, say, okay, you're going to have 1 week to come. You're the core. You come up with the vision here. You have 1 week to try to come up with it. And then you have 3 months to try to grow it. And then at the end of 3 months, you decide whether or not you axe it. Or because a lot of people, when they come to it psychologically, maybe Tammy and Daniel are kind of doing this. They're almost overly projecting where they're going to be and kind of carving out a niche for themselves in it. And that can kind of wind up constraining the growth. But I think that there could be something interesting where if we created something that kind of decreases expectations and we just kind of create the parameters for how you could grow this eighth continent, and then try to get people around that and then comparing notes. Because I think it's going to be just a lot of different experiments. And I think that you're going to have to just experiment with we need to try to figure out how to find the right 3 to 5 people. Who knows? Maybe it would be you, me, and 3 other people, or maybe not. But I think that might kind of have to be what gets facilitated here, just kind of a framework for how to approach this, and then a way to kind of knowledge share so we can see, oh shit, it looks like Sam and George and Hannah figured it out, and we were all kind of part of this runoff. What do you think about that?
I think it's an interesting experiment. And as an experiment, the most important thing I would see coming out of that is, how do we evaluate? Because if it's a single metric, as in, let's say, number of recruits, then clearly that can be gamified.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's the quality of experience, then it's also difficult to measure. Or whether it's, dare I even say, quality of people. That's a very mistaken construct, but some people will have that, Yep. Or is it the product that these teams actually produce? And that can be measurable in a number of other ways as well. So these experiments are going to be useful, but I think the experiment design, sorry, there's a garbage scow. I don't know if you can hear it. So anyway, there's an experiment design for these experiments. Experiment design for these experiments that I think we need to consider first before we waste 50 teams of 5 people in 3 months trying to go after something that we say, oh geez, maybe number of people recruited was the wrong metric.
Yep.
Because if it's the number of people recruited, China wins, or
Yep.
maybe not number of people recruited, but number of people birthed within some geographic area,
Totally.
So
And there are fantastic 100%. And there are, that's a project in and of itself that we could even have that same experiment design applied to, of breakout teams and that same kind,
that's right.
of trying to design, and then it just gets turtles all the way.
There you go. There's a meta game of how do we set this up so we get the right kind of game where 5 people can go and create something, And that's really, and by the way, that's really my beef with this whole gamification concept, is that in gamification, there's 2 classes of people. There's the game designers and then there's the game players. And very rarely do game players get to be game designers as well.
Yeah.
That's really the infinite game, The infinite game is that game that we all want to play. But when I see gamification efforts, somebody says, oh, well, let's just set it up this way and let's just have credits as reputation numbers and blah, blah, blah. By that, you've already constrained it to a problem that's not very interesting to me,
Totally.
So I'm very curious about just game design and game playing, and can you actually meld those roles? Because that's what life is.
Yep.
And as long as you stratify game designers versus game players, that's a world that I don't feel drawn to.
Interesting. Interesting. You still need somebody has to. Okay, so coming back to Bitcoin, I think it's just one of the most beautiful things that's ever happened, because you just put the code out there and it just is. And then it's a matter of how people interact with it. And then that changes the people. And it's right. It's a complex adaptive system, I suppose. So and it's not really people there. It's just purely a reflection of the people that are interacting with. And it's a mathematical process that is occurring and being run by machines. So you almost want to figure out how do you design, and it was just made by a very small group of people, and then they just release the spirit, and then it interacts with everyone, and there's feedback between it and people. So then how do you kind of do something like that, where it's not some guy who controls levers and the game, but we just release something and then we can watch it grow, kind of a thing.
So that vision, although I am not nearly as ambitious or as accomplished as to claim that this is the case, but that's the vision that drives me when I say I'm trying to create that one pager for the community of impact. I'm trying to simplify the genetics of how collaboration works, so that can I figure out how simple it can be that it can fit in large font on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and then carpet bomb the world with 8 billion sheets of paper and hope that somewhere between 3,000 and 30,000 people see it, say, wow, I want to do this, connect with each other, behave in a way that those guidelines and principles recommend, and then achieve something that hasn't been achieved before. That's the vision. You can call it a manifesto. You can call it there's a number of words that can apply to that, right? It's basically think of it as a declaration of independence, from this mad world that we're in, and basically a citizenship, opt in to the 8th continent. This new possible 8th continent.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
It's cool, and it's the ideas that are powerful, and it's like it's a viral, and it's just the idea itself that's contagious, and then it spreads.
And I don't in any way claim that I've got it, but that's what I'm trying to work towards. Okay, can I put something out there that is that simple and yet that powerful? And I think of it as DNA. If you get the DNA right, of course, then DNA takes over, it replicates itself, and we're all symptoms of it, right? Yeah. So can we create that collaborative DNA that distills with the kind of collaboration we want to see and that populates the world that we want to live in?
Interesting.
And that's the experiment that I want to be able to run.
Interesting. And then, so then you have things like the Occupy movement that I think that they kind of tapped into that, or Anonymous, they've kind of tapped into that.
To me, Anonymous is very interesting, but Occupy to me, in some senses, was a disappointment. Now, clearly it accomplished a great thing by giving us a lot of memes, a few memes that many of us now take for granted. Before they got there, I think it was much more controversial. But I also think I take a look at these hundreds of people, camping in parks or parking lots or whatever, and I say, Jesus, if we really knew how to do this right, there are lots of brains of reasonable power that could have accomplished much more than just these 1 or 2 dozen memes that came out of the Occupy movement.
Mm.
Who was it? Clay Shirky or somebody has said that, hey, if we just took everybody in the US, instead of watching TV for one weekend, they all basically devoted themselves towards some interesting piece of work that required some sort of creativity. It essentially would almost equal the creativity in an encyclopedia overnight or in Wikipedia overnight. That's the mental bandwidth we have that's wasted every weekend because everybody watches TV. I was saying all that mental bandwidth that was wasted by people just camping in tents, shouting slogans.
Interesting.
Is a poor excuse for collaboration.
Yeah.
If they would have produced a whole bunch more. Now, that's what I would like to see come out of our collaboration. And it is not yet proven that we know how to collaborate so that we prove that it's scalable. By the way, I don't know if I've introduced to you my notion of what scalable, successful collaboration means. Okay.
No.
To me, it's that if you have any group of N people and you add K people to it, then that group of N plus K people should be able to come up with a work product or a decision or a design or something that's measurably but objectively better than that group of N. If we cannot do that, then we cannot scale.
At least K divided by N plus K better. At least.
No, I don't even require that. I just require that it just be better.
A little bit better. Just a marginal. Marginal.
Right. Too often we've seen the group of N add one person and the group goes to shit. Okay? Yeah. Pardon my English. Right?
No worries. No.
We've seen that way too often, right? So anyway, that's my notion of what scalable, successful collaboration really must prove. And I don't think there's any group of us that has proven we know how to do that.
I'm really liking the Bitcoin guys. Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. I'm really thinking those guys are just doing awesome. The Bitcoin guys.
Now maybe they have, right? By the way, my earlier exemplar for successful collaboration was Linux, right? But in each of these cases, whether it's Bitcoin or Linux, it's not peer-to-peer, collaboration that really just spawned some, emergent thing. It was a group of central people that had an idea and then people gathered around it. So I'm not sure yet we figured out how to do it other than that centralized model. Now, yes, control maybe has dissipated to most of the community, but still it required a seeding by some initial group. And
so maybe this is kind of I think that everything will start with an initial group. Is that the problem that we're trying to solve? How to start with a big group at first?
No, what I'm trying to figure out is how can you make it so that it's not dependent on a single personality or a small number of personalities? In other words, let's say Bitcoin is widely successful and it might be the best exemplar, right? Because if you take Linux and some assassination, unfortunately, fells Linus, right? What happens to Linux? Arguably, it would lose a lot of momentum because Linus has final authority over Linux. And there's, yes, core committers now, but, at least he was the central figure. The way I understand Bitcoin working is there is a central figure, but he's, in some sense, an unknown figure, right? He was anonymous for quite a while until he got, outed out recently. But I want to make it so that it's a live, emergent phenomenon that's not specifically dependent on, let's say, Tammy, or you, or me, or Daniel, or William, or any of that. It will actually live regardless of whether we're at the center of it, because it needs to be important enough that it has that life.
Exactly. Well, religion has kind of accomplished this too, right? So I think we can take some things from religion as well, I suppose.
Well, arguable.
About that?
It's arguable
Yeah,
because,
yeah,
you know, there is
yeah.
Jesus
At least
figure, there are these Pope
in
figures, there are these prophet figures.
yeah. But then
Yeah.
within religion, there's a process that kind of keeps helping, keeps re-emerging them, and there are people that are saying who they are. I think that religion and Bitcoin are actually somewhat similar there too, right? Who's this guy
Yeah.
Satoshi Nakamoto?
Maybe
But
what you're saying is we should launch ourselves as a religion. Oh, that's a new thought. You know,
take
the
design.
Church of Global Collaboration.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you're probably right, and so I think that with this very specific thing of, uh, I think with this very specific thing of how to do onboarding, we're realizing that there's a more core thing of, okay, wait, what's the real vision here? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
it,
Identity is so important.
yeah, because I could kind of give it to you in like a set, and I'll try to break it down really quick. Um,
By the way, just to note, we've gone way past the 30-minute,
I
and you're
know.
coming up on your.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm coming up on like having to eat pretty soon. Is it okay with you if we just chat a little bit? I think it's good what we're talking about here.
It's really important. So let's take up to the top of the hour, just so I
Okay,
can
7 minutes.
move on and really, earn my keep.
So yeah, I mean, if it, in the details, if you want to understand, William started this. He was interested in how to. It's almost like we're trapped in the challenge, and we're trying to figure out what brought us here and how do we keep on growing from there. If we frame it like that, it's kind of interesting, right? Just kind of like we're constrained within this. So rather than forking or something like that. But anyway, starts with William. He's interested in how do we mirror the UN, right? Just create a mirror website that's direct democracy, right? So where we would get people taking part in it globally. And then he said, okay, but I need other people on the team. So I'm going to contact Daniel, and I've heard about Aaron. I'm going to contact Aaron too. He contacts Daniel. Daniel is big into the API thing. And so then William says, okay, could we mix the API thing with my mirroring thing? And then they're like, okay, yeah, I think we're going to be able to do that. And then they call on me, and I'm like, okay, well, can we mix these? Okay, I guess we can mix these, but you're gonna, let's not mix that much more after this. And also, how are you going to build a community of 1,000 people? I was saying, I think you should share some of the budget with everybody, so that you're kicking them a little something so everyone has skin in the game, kind of deal. And William left because William left because he thought that it wouldn't work, too many cooks. And I kind of removed my thing about basic income for everyone getting a grant. And then, so now the vision kind of lies in kind of like theoretical, how do we collaborate? How do we collaborate? I think that's kind of where the vision lies at this point. Yeah. But no more around APIs specifically or mirroring the UN specifically. Definitely mirroring the UN specifically is very gone. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they're at the core. Yeah, but I'm not sure that the theory is at the core either. I think it depends on who you ask.
Interesting.
Because I do think that, the way, I don't fault anyone for this, but Tammy does believe that there's a substrate of conversations that just needs to happen. And out of those conversations, many things will be possible. But right now, we're not describing much of what is possible. We're describing the conversations that we will put in place. Either that or that, I haven't done enough to really say, here are the other things that can be built on top of those conversations. I think that's something I could do. So in some sense, each of us is bringing what each of us knows, which is natural. And we haven't yet had sufficient time to really build that model of how the substrate supports the foundation, which has other pillars to it, which has a ceiling to it, which has a sun that, is shining on it. I don't think we've had time to have all of those discussions and design thinking. And yet we're here 2-3 days
interesting
before the mission has to be submitted.
Interesting. I am a little bit of the philosophy of just seeing what you have and then figuring out how to cobble it together. I am a little bit of that philosophy.
That's the only way we can really work, right? We can't say, let's put together something we don't have, and that's also the essence of Agile. And it's either going to be good enough in the evaluator's eyes or not. But the important thing, I think, is if the evaluation of this proposal is our complete identity, we have 98% chance of being disappointed. If we have our community as the identity, and we'll be, somewhat, happy if we get the proposal funded. But if we actually like the community and like the way we're growing it and like the principles we're experimenting with and liking the thinking that we're having and liking the conversations we're having, then I think by definition, we're a success already. And I'm much more the latter. Okay.
Yeah. Interesting.
Anyway, it's coming up on the hour. We've gone a ways. I mean, there's always this divergence before we converge. I think we're still in divergence mode. So we'll just have more conversations.
Yeah. Cool.
And I've been recording.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, please share this. I knew you were recording, so I've been censoring all of my slanderous comments. So, I'm joking. But
I've not been censoring mine.
We should still share it. I believe in sharing all, kind of.
Agree.
Usually, 99% of the time. But so, is there any kind of concrete thing we should try to run with from here?
Okay, so we didn't get around to that, I think. But I think a good thing would be if you and I independently wrote up these thoughts as we recall them best out of this conversation in the context of onboarding. And then what I'll do is I'll try and put the two together in the time that's available. And then let's see whether or not anybody actually used this and has other opinions they want to throw into the mix. I'm reasonably likely thinking that Tammy will find this interesting. This conversation.
Interesting. What do you think? 50 words max?
There's a challenge, right? Okay, let's say.
You're constrained by reality, right?
That's not even one line.
You are constrained.
You're going to say 140 characters, right?
Okay,
let's say
how about
we say one paragraph?
Okay. Charles Dickens, man, you ever read him? He was writing pretty long paragraphs there.
But I didn't know Charles Dickens. I'm no Charles Dickens. Okay.
Okay, yeah, we could do that. Sure, that's cool.
All right,
I did just have one thought.
Yeah. 50 words, one paragraph.
50 words. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's cool. Here's one other kind of evolution of it. What if before editing, it could be up to 200 words, but final, it must be 50 words. So you can only ever fill up 200 words to play with, but in the final, it must be delivered 50 words or 100. What do you think about that? Kind of like I don't know.
I'm willing to give that a shot. Okay. And if I have too difficult a time, then I'll punt and say I wasn't able to do it, but I'll give that a shot.
Because I see this happen where you get the 50-word thing and then people say, okay, well, I'm just currently just writing it. It's just the draft, but then the draft never gets cut down. So it even kind of constrains our draft for how big that would be. Okay. So this is just kind of like, in this onboarding, because this is the vision that people have to see and the little kind of prose-like thing. Okay, cool. And I think that what we've said is kind of interesting, right? Like, what we've been talking.
It's interesting to us.
Yeah.
So by definition, it's interesting.
Okay. So, all right. Cool. And we could even have them be separate.
We're going to be on time, Aaron. So we've got an agreement. Let's try this. Let's see how far we get. Thanks.
Take care, Sam. Good chat.
Later.
Bye-bye.
Yep. Fun. Bye.
Bye.